Okay, great. Let's go ahead and we will keep it going. We want to kind of give you a couple more skills of working with a clash detective that'll hopefully make it a little bit easier to solve some of these issues that the clash detective is discovering. So, clash detective, it does a pretty good job of what it's all about. It's really very systematic. It's just going to go through and based on some level of tolerance that you're going to specify and some sort of clash, whether it's a hard clash. A clearance clash is kind of an interesting one you should know about. That's the whole notion that I'm going to have two things pass by each other, but there's a bubble of clearance around that element that we want to leave clear. We don't want to have anything interfering with that. So you can specify so many millimeters, so many inches of clearance around a piece of piping or around some hot element where you need to have some sort of insulative space between so that you don't have some sort of a heat transfer issue. You also have duplicates. Duplicates is all about the notion that every once in a while you have just elements that sort of, they get modeled twice and they get put into the model in two different places. You just want to find those things so they're not double counted. So it's a number of things you can go through and find out of here. But we choose, what kind of a clash we want in there. We can even go through and have a clash over time, which is kind of an interesting concept. That's the whole notion that through the 4D simulation, some things may move in and out of the space at different times during the construction process. And you can run a simulation and look for clashes that'll happen as a crane moves through or a piece of equipment gets moved in temporarily and moves back out. So it's not just a single point in time. You could actually attach a timeline to this and just really run a series of simulations to kind of look to see, is there a clash now? Will there be a clash 5 minutes from now? Will there be a clash tomorrow? And kind of isolate that. So incredibly powerful tool. Now, finding all the clashes, giving you the list of the reports, results, and ultimately producing a report, great starting point, but it still is a little bit hard to go through and manage all those things. And what's happening in a lot of the different BIM meetings on job sites is really it's getting everyone together and really trying to figure out how to resolve all these clashes. Because for every clash, it's sort of this issue. Okay, this is clashing with that. Really, what is the best strategy for fixing it? And the computer won't tell you that. The computer can only report to you where the problem are. The expertise of the people in the room really guides how these things should be resolved. If I have a whole lot of clashes between framing elements and ductwork, I could think about that moving individual little pieces of ductwork, or I might just need to be thinking about a whole different strategy for fixing that. Maybe I need to be rethinking about my structural scheme or the floor-to-floor space. There's some issue going on there, and really it's only the expertise in the room that's going to help figure that out. That the computer just reports what it sees. But we can get all these clashes, we can go ahead and produce those reports and give them to people. So I can get a report of everything that's been assigned to me. You can get a report that everything's assigned to you. And then next week we're all going to get together and with your updated model and my updated model, you're going to run the reanalysis. We're going to hopefully drive the number of clashes down, see if we resolve them all and just kind of track them like a database. Okay, so that's the general idea of the workflow. In terms of working with us, there's a really nice tool that's built into Navisworks that helps you work with what you're finding here and the original models, just to kind of address this issue of, you can see where the problem is here. I'd almost like to go right back to the model and see where the problem is in the model so that I don't have to always go through and do that translation. And that's this feature called Switchback that we'll show you. And Switchback is really sort of a very simple notion. It's really for these different elements, for this wide flange or for this piece of ductwork, whatever it is that I'm sort of looking at that's creating the clash, can I go through and actually just see that right in the model so I can start making a change to it. And how Switchback works is as follows. If you go back to Revit and you have access to the file, so I still have access to the MEP model here and I have access to the structural model. They're all kind of open, hanging around in here somewhere. Okay. Within these models, what I'd love to do is actually just have the ability to have Navisworks go back and find things in the model. So I'm going to go to the MEP model. And what I want to do is turn on the Switchback capability. And Switchback is something that actually gets installed when you install Navisworks. So if you've put in Navisworks after you installed Revit, it'll put a couple of different add-ins in the external tool, or in add-ins, external tools in that little menu. There's Navisworks 2014. This is something that'll let you go through and export a Revit file into Navisworks. That functionality got built in so it happens automatically. You don't have to use it because this feature anymore, because now Navisworks, when you open the Revit file, it'll do it automatically for you. It actually creates a little temporary little NWC Navisworks cache file for you. Navisworks Switchback is the one we want to play with right now. It basically just sets up Revit so it's waiting to hear from Navisworks. Okay, it's just sort of setting up a little listening. Okay, I'm waiting for anything from Navisworks, and if I hear anything, I'll respond in Revit appropriately. So if I turn on Switchback, not a whole lot appears to happen, but let's kind of see what it looks like. Okay, go back over to Navisworks. So here's the idea. I'm going to go over to Navisworks, and I found some sort of clash that looks interesting to me. I want to take a look at that rectangular duct over here. So I should be able to say Switchback. Okay. You might notice Revit did a little jump over here in my little taskbar. Let me go over to Revit. Okay. It's actually highlighting an element over here in Revit. Okay. I'm zoomed in very, very close right now. This may not be the best perspective in terms of what's going on, but let me see if I can show you what's going on over here. So it's chosen some piece of ductwork. It looks like it's that one. This rectangular duct. Let's go back over to Navisworks. I believe it's that one, rectangular duct. Again, I'll say Switchback. Come back over to Revit. It'll take it to me. Whatever the one that's blue and highlighted, that's the one that's actually doing it. Although it looks like there's actually two things in here. I should probably rotate this around and get a different perspective on it. That is the duct in question. What can I do now? I can start playing around with that duct. So based upon what I'm seeing over here in Navisworks, what might I want to do? I might have to lower that duct just so it misses the structural system. I come back over to Revit. I can say that I want to offset that duct, and so, maybe it's going to be 9 feet tall as opposed to 10 feet tall right now. Okay. I've just lowered that whole system. Okay. What I really should do now is actually go back and save this, then run the clash test again, and see if that actually fixes some things. Okay. Chances are it will. Let me go ahead and save this away. What do I want to do? Yeah, I'll do that. Okay. Save this away. I'll go back over to Navisworks. Let me go through and basically say I made a change right there. Let me do test this one again. Let me run the test again. It didn't update it yet. Rerun the test. I think I have to go through and update the file. Let me think about how to do that right away. I added the test. I resaved it. Oh, I should actually check to make sure I'm saving it in the that I'm saving the right version. Hang on. Go Revit. Let me see where this one is. I'm being a little sloppy about where my files are being saved right now. Okay, that's the session 18. That's good. That's the one we just saved. We come back into Navisworks. I want to just go through and refresh that file. Let's see if I can do that easily. That's just doing that. I'm trying to go about linking this. I know it'll work if I close it. Let me close it. I'll save this. Go back into Navisworks. I'll figure out there's a more efficient way just to refresh the file in just a second, but I'm sort of stumbling on it right now. Go back into Navisworks. Okay, since I've saved away the Navisworks file set. Yes, sorry, what you got?
In practice, who's the one
Well, that's a very good question. Yeah, it's really whoever is the BIM coordinator for the entire project. Often that person will be someone who's working for the construction company or some sort of firm that's coordinating the entire project. But that's a very loaded question about who actually does coordinate it and stuff like that. It's just something that has to happen. The team has to decide who that's going to be. But almost every big project, they'll have someone who is explicitly known as the BIM coordinator. And they're the one who's ultimately responsible for all that stuff. Yeah, very good question. Okay, what's it telling me here? It's giving me this thing, the model have changed. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, well, let's rerun them. Okay, reset all, update all. Ooh, try that. That's interesting. Didn't change it very far in terms of what's going on. It was 32 before, right? Now it's 33. That's not looking good in terms of what's going on. Let's see if we can actually figure out what's happening. Although, interesting. Well, oh, that's okay. Now, I should pay attention to what's going on. Notice what's happened. I moved that thing on down. Okay, there's still 33 clashes, although 23 have moved into the resolved category. Okay, so even though there are 33 clashes, do not be dissuaded by that. I actually, just by moving that one duct down to 9 feet, which may not have been the best architectural thing to do, okay, I actually have 23 resolved. I only have 9 that are still considered active, and I actually created one new clash for myself. Yes?
How do you deal with that when you have like ductwork and beams, and the ductwork needs to go underneath the beams, but it doesn't fit into the ceiling cavity? Is that when you like create one of those extra little things that comes down? I mean,
Yeah. No, it really is kind of a tough issue because, you know, as you're trying to fit them in there, if the, you know, if you can't squeeze it underneath and you just have like a really particularly big beam, every once in a while you have those little hoo-haws and U's that go around things and stuff like that, which are incredibly inefficient in terms of all those bends and really increasing the load, but you sort of do what you have to. Sometimes you do that, sometimes you'll actually cut out through the beam. Sometimes it'll involve just reworking the beam strategy in that one section of the building. Yeah, so, you know, you're onto really, it is literally the $1 million question. You know, how do you go through and resolve these? And this is really where the structural designer, the MEP designer, y'all have to kind of work together to figure out what the best way to share that very limited amount of space is.
if you were to go underneath that, would it be a better decision to use like flexible duct rather than hard duct?
Now, if I was going to do a big bend like that, I would do it with hard duct just because it'll be a better efficiency.
Okay.
Yeah, because as soon as you get to flexi duct, it's a much rougher surface.
Yeah.
It really cuts down the efficiency. But you know, so we could box around the beam. We could try to cut a hole in the beam. We could try to just move the beams in such a way so that you know, something different is happening. But even if I was looking up at this in plan view as opposed to you know, kind of a elevation view. Let's say we had the building. And it sort of looked like this by default. This is a plan view. And I ran all the beam systems doing this. Yeah, it may be that what I need to do is actually rethink what's happening in the beams in this area right here. And instead, you know, run a couple big beams, but run them in that direction so that I can actually start getting the you know, transfer out to where I need it to be. So there's a lot of ways to do this. Another way some people approach it is, oh, as opposed to having the big solid beams, like the I-beams that are all kind of solid steel, we go through and they'll do beams where they have the top web, the lower web, and then we have more of this open web system. Where if you're very clever, you know, with these sort of systems, you can actually fit ductwork in between the web members. But this is the hard part for anyone who's going through and taking PBL next quarter or something like that. This is what you spend a lot of time trying to do, is figure out how to get all these things to fit together. Okay, so yeah, sometimes if it just won't fit, this maybe we just need to kind of increase the floor-to-floor height. It's definitely it's a hard one. Yeah, so I don't undersell that. And again, the software, what is it? It doesn't have solutions for that. That's kind of the interesting thing. The software as a tool can really only tell you where it sees the problem, but really the expertise to solve it. There's no one's really come up with a great auto routing way to just minimize that. Oh, that's a really good research topic for anyone who wants to like continue doing graduate work. That'd be a really good, interesting research topic. Is really how to come up with an optimal strategy for resolving these sorts of issues and consider all the different trade-offs, because I could try 5 different things and really figure out which is going to be the most effective and least cost impactful. That's a really good topic to think about. Okay, so Switchback is actually sort of a really useful tool, but the idea is after you Switchback, go through and continue to see where the results are. So I still have 9 active things. I have 1 new thing, that's in red, because it's in the red category. I still have 9 orange, they're still active. All the little yellow ones, they're resolved. So those, at this point, I can say, okay, taken care of, don't have to worry about them anymore. So what you're trying to do is really just drive this number down. Let's see what I introduced to new. So, what's happening here? This is interesting. I have some rectangular duct. It looked like it's actually going ahead and conflicting with, it's some hollow steel section. I believe this is a piece of K-bracing that's kind of coming up through. So in terms of this one specific piece, again, in fact, it doesn't even look like it's all that bad a conflict. That's one of those ones where I might need to sort of just shift the duct over a few inches. There's something I need to do just to go ahead and make that fit better. So I can think about what my strategy is. I can say, let's take a look at that rectangular duct, switch it back, go back over to Revit. Let me see if I zoom out a little. That's the piece of ductwork I'm looking at right now. So maybe in this case, what I need to do to this one is, I'm just going to have it here right now. It's like a 3D view. I want to look at another view. Like basically, you'll put some little hook in it, where it transitions over 2 inches or something like that, just enough to miss it. Something like that. I could also change the size of the duct. So as opposed to being a 12 by... It's interesting, it gives me these perspective views which are actually sort of hard to work in. Let me go back to, yes?
Change it while viewing the structural model, because that's where the clash occurs. We should just link the structural model.
A very, very good point. I love that point. Okay, so let's go through and I'm going to knock out the structural model just so, since it's open, I won't be able to link to it. Okay, let me say, no, I'm not going to save those changes right now. I'm going to come back over here and, as suggested, let me put it in another view. Hang on. Perspective views are always funny. You just can't do a lot of things in perspective views. Let me do a link a Revit to the structural model. Structural model, auto center to center, evil. Don't do that. Auto origin to origin, much better. Okay, and now let's see if I can find that view and where it went. Okay, so back over to Navisworks, switch back, and I can sort of see where it is right now. So this is correct. It's giving me a much better sense of really what it needs to do. In this case, you can actually sort of see, I got that other K-brace there. If I just shifted this thing over about 2 inches or something like that, I probably would avoid a lot of this hassle. Okay, maybe take care of that. So that's really the idea of what you guys are after. You're really just trying to go through, figure out where the clashes are, try to isolate the clashes, just adapt as you need to, figure out whether you're going to change the structure or change the mechanical, and then once you make those changes, just rerun in the clash test and see if you can bring that down. See if you can, you may not be able to get rid of 100% of them, and that's okay. Get rid of most of them, something like that. So, some are just really very, very tough problems. So if you're not 100% successful, it could open up bigger issues in terms of what's going on. But see, what we're really trying to see is what your original number of clashes are and how many you can drive out. And then we may have some very hard design decisions that are outside your control that we'd have to make to ultimately be able to resolve all those things. Okay, but that's it, sort of surfacing the issues and trying to figure out where they are. Sort of makes sense in terms of clash detection? Okay, let's then introduce you to the final topic, and that's this whole notion of trying to do a 4D simulation and think about where that is useful. Okay, 4D simulations actually, I think, very, very fun to do. It's really the very cool notion that as you put a building together, there's a way of assembling it and being able to see that. It's incredibly useful for actually finding out conflicts long before they happen in the field, to really kind of do some detailed construction planning and really see how something's going to come together. Because often our assumptions about the finished thing and how it's going to fit together, overlook that we actually have to get everything into place in the right order and the right time to actually assemble it. I can design things that are sort of next to impossible to assemble just because of like all the clearances and stuff like that. So it's good to think about really what the whole assembly sequence is going to be. And to look at that, what we're going to do is actually just work with the same model, this very same structural model that we've sort of been playing around with. We kind of close out the mechanical model. I'm going to open that structural model now. Oops. That's the architectural. See if I can get the structural model back open. Okay, and really think about how you'd go through and build this in a very simple way. So this model is over in Navisworks. Let's just go over to Navisworks and take a look at it there. Close the clash detective right now. And you can zoom out here. So I'd like to think about actually building that thing up. And there's an order to it. I probably would put the foundations in first and put the columns, then the major beams and the sub-beams, kind of build it up, something like that. Okay. In order to do something like that, there actually is a really cool tool within Navisworks called Timeliner. And it looks like this. It's really this whole notion of we can put in a task schedule, add a bunch of different tasks to it. Okay? And then we can associate different elements that are in the model with those tasks and ultimately just kind of string them all together. So we get a just ultimate 4D simulation of how this is going to work. And adding tasks is pretty straightforward. We can say add a task. This is going to be my foundations. It's going to have some sort of planned start and a planned end. It's going to be a construction type task versus demolition. Okay. And I'm going to attach some elements to it. Now, in terms of what Navisworks is good for and not good for, it is not a project scheduling tool. So it won't make a Microsoft Project or Primavera schedule for you. It won't do that. It'll take any sort of list of tasks with starts and ends and use that information, but it's not a project scheduling tool. So somewhere in one of the various tools that you have available, okay, you'll come up with a CPM schedule, some sort of schedule which is going to lay out this task precedes that task and takes a certain amount of time. Okay, so it's not good at that, but you can sort of pull in information from Microsoft Project or Primavera. That is really, you do your project planning somewhere else, but again, in the Swiss Army knife of file opening, it just pulls in a schedule and uses a schedule. So we can bring in some schedule activities. Every type of activity has some notion of a task type, whether it's construction, demolition, or temporary. And there's the notion of attaching things to it. So what happens when we attach things to a task is those elements will be considered to be constructed or demolished at that point in time. And we can run a simulation. And how you attach things looks something like this. I can pull open that selection tree of model objects. Kind of pin that there so I can take a look at it. And in the structural tab, let me see if I can even find those. I have all sorts of structural footing elements. Got a bunch of them in there. I can grab a whole bunch of those. And what I actually do is just drag them right on top of the task. Okay. And now all those little blue foundation elements which are hanging around over here are now associated with that task. So the principle about what's going on here is really pretty simple. Tasks times pulling all the things together, okay, making it happen. That actually is not so hard to understand. For example, I'm going to put another task in here. I'm going to say, let's say columns first floor. Okay. It'll have some, even this, that's pretty unrealistic. Let's say it's going to be through the 28th. This is going to start, what is it? Again, my project scheduling software will give me some sense of when this is going to happen. Then when it's time to associate these things with it, I'm going to go through and find those structural columns which are on level 1. It's a bunch of them right there. You can sort of see them highlighted in blue. See if I can grab the whole slew of them. Yep. Okay, so now they're associated. So at a really high level now, if I just ran this simulation, okay, what would happen is first you'd see some foundations showing up, and then you'd see some columns showing up on top of them. Okay, so let's give you a sense of what that looks like. I can adjust some settings in here about how long I want it to take to do this, what the interval size is. I tend not to do percentages. I tend to actually like to do days. I like to sort of see things day at a time, something like that. But there's different ways. Let me go ahead and try running the simulation. You can sort of see there's the view. It's kind of not a whole lot showing up in the view just right now. I'm just going to try and pull that down so you can see a little bit better. At day 1, nothing's happening. I play. It's kind of interesting. Nothing is showing up. Why is that? Am I up too high? Oh, there go the foundations. Well, I got my foundations. So what happened with the others? Okay, coming on back. Tasks, there, that looks fine. Oh, I have to make it a construction task. Let's try that again. Simulation. Day at a time. You can see as we move through time, the foundations are being completed a certain percentage. They actually sort of drop on in there. A chunk. Now, that's not probably a very fair representation. Now we're going to get the first 4 columns, a chunk. What would really happen is we would probably build them in some sort of order. Maybe the foundations in this part of the building would start first, then a few days later these and those. We'd sort of roll through. Yes?
I have 2 kind of aesthetics questions.
Yes?
One, can you have whatever you're building kind of like fade in over the process of the building timeline versus just coming in at the end of, if you say it was from December 1st, 2013 to February 2nd, 2014, it doesn't show up on the screen until the 2nd of February 2014.
Yep.
And they just kind of pop in. Is there a way to have it kind of build up into it, or is that?
Yes. So here's what it is. It's really, in terms of all these different types of activities, like construction activities, you can have this whole notion of, how they should show up just before, then, at the end they show up. And the way it's configured by default, the end appearance is give it to you fully. But you can sort of say the start of the simulation. So at the start of the simulation, there's nothing. Okay, don't put anything there. The early appearance would be, okay, how does it look just as it's getting started? The end appearance, okay, yeah, you can basically control all these different things so that it actually, gives it a little bit more, a little more aesthetic, like desirability in terms of what you want.
So the other thing is, can you export it as like a video?
Yes, you can, and that's ultimately what you guys are going to be doing. Is you can, after you do this, you can export the animation as an AVI file. Okay, so you can sort of have animations, set them all up, then export them ultimately as movie files. That's a great way to share them with people. So let me do this. I'm going to open up one that's already sort of canned, okay, that has a little more information, and we're going to reverse engineer it a little bit in terms of how you get there, and I'll show you sort of a couple cool tricks. So I actually have a file set all set up. Oh, and of course, that's not going to work for me. Let me try something else here. Hang on. I thought I put everything out just the way it needed to be, but if it's not going to be just the way I need it to be, I'll kind of mess with it and we'll make it work. Let me try this. Not set there. Okay, hang on just a second. I'm going to find it over where I need to find it. I'm just messing around, even myself right now, in terms of trying to pull it together. I want to show you one that actually sort of works. Not there. Not there. See if I can resolve it over here. And it's still, damn, what did I do? No, ignore that for now. I'll go back to what I was doing before. I was hoping to pull one out of the oven just to kind of show you it all work. But we'll make it work slowly but surely anyway. Okay, let's go on back and I'll open up that file set that I started creating. Okay, and we created just a few tasks in here. Actually, looks like I didn't even save them. Okay. As you want to go through and create tasks, let's talk about it at a couple different angles. One is you want to go through and bring in tasks. You want to start having a task associated with here and kind of make it all happen. So in terms of the tasks, I can just add tasks, add another task, and just sort of build it out. Just, if you've got a schedule, you can put it right in here, and that's going to work just fine. If you happen to work in Microsoft Project or Primavera, or even just do it in Excel, and you have a file that has this information in it, you can go ahead and just link it in. You can associate these things so that you don't necessarily have to create everything from scratch. So how that actually works is there's something called data sources, where you can add a data source and bring in a Microsoft Project file or a CSV file, just something that has that information so that you don't have to type it all in there. And the nice thing about linking to one of these external data sources is if you continue to update things in Primavera or you update things in Microsoft Project, every time you open it, it'll pull the most recent information and you'll always get the most current version of the schedule. Okay, so that's kind of a good thing to do. So I'm going to open up just a CSV version of it and see if I can get out there. Stanford, 120, 18. Okay, I have a little timeline file set up. It's a CSV file, just an Excel file that has some information in it. Yeah, there's this whole notion of really how to go through and tie things together. There's some columns that we can link together. For example, task name, I'm going to tie to title that's in the external file, task type, say plan start date. I'm going to bring that, I have sort of something I call expected start, expected end. I'm just creating some basic like associations between columns that are in the file and what it expects to be over here. Okay, I'm actually going to go through and put an ID in here too. For example, I'm going to relate that to something called task ID. I'll tell you why I'm going to keep that in just a second. Need synchronization ID too. Okay, I'll make it also the task ID. Okay, let me say that I'm going to refresh the data sources. And what that does is that just pulls together a list. So what was I doing there? It really wasn't all that exciting. It was just really basically pulling in a list of different things. And you can sort of see what the little task timeline looks like relative to that. But it's just a list. It's just like a whole hierarchical list, very much like I set up in the assignment. I gave you that basic sort of list there of columns, beam, joists. I actually have exterior walls, columns, beam, joists. I have some more activities in here. We don't have to use all the activities, just things that we associate with her. I can take out those ones that I don't necessarily need. But I just need to actually have up a little list over here. So the next step is I want to go through and associate things in the model with the things in the task timeline so I can pull them together. And let me show you kind of two ways to approach that. The way that most people approach that within Navisworks is they'll go through and I got a nice list of activities over here. I got some dates. They're a little old now because when I first created this example was at the beginning of the year or last year. Okay, I can choose, for example, the level 1 structural columns and just pull it right on top and do that. I can go through and under structural framing, that's a little bit trickier. You'll see that the structural framing at level 1 really just is the hollow sections. It's actually considered to be at level 2. There's wide flange sections, but even in the wide flange sections, there's different sizes. Some of these are the beam systems, some are the beams. It's a little bit hard for me to kind of choose what's going on. And really, that's really what I want to leave you with more than anything in terms of the challenge with where it comes in terms of Navisworks, is that as you're going through and selecting things and pulling them in, where the work comes in is actually just trying to figure out how to map these elements to those ideas down there. It's because a lot of times the way things are stacked up over here in the list, it's not necessarily the way I think about them. It's just sort of the way it sort of puts the hierarchy together. And the way it builds the hierarchy isn't necessarily a great match. It doesn't think of them in terms of joists or beams. It just thinks of sizes of different pieces of steel. So sometimes it gets a little bit confusing to me to kind of manage it and explicitly choose things within Navisworks. Okay, so you can go through and pull them in and do it that way, and that's kind of a very quick way to do it. But let me suggest to you what I think is actually a much more powerful way to kind of get you going. And I'll introduce the topic today. I'll point you to a video that sort of explains more about it so you can kind of keep on going with it. We'll talk about it again on Tuesday when we get back together. But it looks something like this, and this is one of my favorite tricks. Of all the different little things I play around with in Revit and Navisworks, it's one of my favorite little tricks. Okay, here's our model, our structural model. Our structural model actually has all these different elements. That's kind of cool. But this model is really a database full of information. Okay? And that database of information can be customized. So, although this information is currently about the sizes and the shapes and the locations, if you want to start storing a little bit of construction information, you can also add that to the model too. Okay, so any different element you go through and choose over here, for example, that column, it has a certain amount of information that's stored about it, the size, the volume, the heights, things like that. But if we also want to start tagging that column with a little bit of construction information, okay, we can. We can add fields to it. So for example, one way to think about getting our schedule and our model in sync with each other is to start adding what I'll call a task ID to each of the different elements in the model. Okay. If you associate every element with a model with a specific construction task ID, then all of a sudden it becomes really easy to kind of think about what's going to be built when, because you're just explicitly saying this will be part of this construction activity. Okay, so how you can do that whenever you want to go through and customize the model looks something like this. Under the Manage tab, you actually have the ability to go through and add parameters to the model. Well, let me see if I can find it in here. Project parameters. What are project parameters? That's database fields that you want to add to the database for this project. Okay, that'll let us extend its functionality. So what I want to do is actually for the elements, actually just add something called the task ID. Just add some sort of simulation ID. So let me work with it. So say I want to choose project parameters. What am I doing? I'm really just adding a field. I'm adding a column to an Excel spreadsheet. I'm adding a field to this. Or I can say, I'd like to add a parameter to the elements in this model. I'm going to call it my task ID. And it has a type, the way we've added parameters in the past. I'm going to make it actually just a piece of text. Because it's not supposed to a length. I kind of like it being, oh, what is it? A text ID that I can map back to kind of a schedule ID that I've used in Microsoft Project. I can give it some sort of place that I want that to exist. For example, I can put it in the construction category. That's just where it's going to show up inside the dialog box. And I'm going to make it an instance parameter. The reason I'm going to make it an instance parameter is I want to be able to have a different task ID for different elements. So every column I want to be able to associate with a different task ID if I want to. That way I have the ability to be very specific about when every individual piece of steel is going to come in. I'm going to say apply that to all the different categories right now. Say OK. And what did that actually do for me? That actually allowed me to, now when I choose an element, to actually have a field called task ID that I can fill in. So if I know that in my Microsoft project, or what is it, Navisworks schedule, that the first 4 columns, let me show you what the display ID is in there. Hang on. Where do I want to customize my field types? Let me go ahead and show that synchronization ID, display ID. There it is. I'll move it up. I'm just going to move it so it shows up at the top of the list. Okay, so if I know that those columns I want to have associated with the ID 120, what I can do is come back over here and put that column in task ID 120. I can take that column over there and put that also in 120. Or I can take this column up here and put it in 220 because I want it to be at the second level. I'm just mapping things to construction IDs. Now, the reason I like to do this over here in Revit is I'm really good in Revit about finding things and associating things. I'm not so good in Navisworks in terms of finding things and changing things. So what I can do is, for example, go to the level 1 framing plan and grab all of these guys and filter it so it's just the columns. So for those 32 columns that are associated right now, I can make them all 120. Or was it 110? I think it was 120. I don't remember. In the same sense, I can go up to the framing plan on the second floor, grab all of those columns, or all those beams, or all those girders, and I'll make those all 220. And why do I like doing it here? It's just because I'm really good at selecting things over in Revit, and I'm not so good in doing them over there. But mapping into these IDs gives me great power. So let me do this. I'll save this away. And what you can do is just sort of map the IDs in Revit to what you want it to be. Come back over here. Okay. Having mapped those things in as structural IDs, I can go back over to Navisworks and let me append that file. Where'd my Revit file go? And with those appended in there, let's do that, finish that. Come on, okay. I have my structural model with task IDs. So far it doesn't look very different. It looks about the same in terms of things that are over here. You know, it looks very similar to what it used to look like. But the deal is, since I put that task ID in as a field, I can actually search for it, items based on that field. So I can switch over to another view where I can look for things by the properties of an element. And you'll actually see that task ID is one of the properties that we can use. And under task ID, we've defined some things as element 220. So the nice thing is now I can just go ahead and grab that and drag that right on top and very quickly get everything that got associated with 220. So why am I doing all this? It's not strictly necessary. If you're good at selecting things in Navisworks and associating with a task ID or tasks in Navisworks directly, super, go for it. But if you want a little help, or you want to be able to associate them, that ability to add a field and associate based on the field just gives you a little more power. And then to finish this off, just as you're leaving the day, so you know, if you want to see some more examples and get started with a 4D simulation over the break, what you can do is, under the BIM curriculum, where'd it go? Under Unit 7, there's something that says 4D simulation and construction planning. you'll find some fantastic or interesting videos anyway that'll go through and basically show you this technique of going through and associating task IDs and then using these task IDs to kind of pull things in to do a better job of simulating the 4D construction. So there's videos out there that will explain kind of everything I just sort of started to introduce in a lot more detail. So let us break for today and get yourself out of here and have a fantastic holiday week. We look forward to seeing you back on a week from Tuesday.